Bonsoir French 203 students, bienvenue au vidéo 7 du chapitre 7 et cette fois on va parler des verbes réfléchis et réciproques au passé composé. In other words, we'll be talking about reflexive and reciprocal verbs in the passé composé, one of the main past verb tenses that you learn about in French. So just to review a little bit, if we look at this conjugation of the reflexive verb se lever, to get up, you can see that in all its forms, we can see a helping verb or an auxiliary verb with être. So, je me suis levé, je suis, tu t'es levé, il s'est levé, etc. So we see different forms of être there as our helping verbs. Some, et, and sont are all the different conjugations of être on the other side of our verb chart. So we see forms of être throughout. That's what helps us form passé composé when we're working with reflexive and reciprocal verbs. But if I want to make these verbs negative, that's the next step we need to move on to. We need to see how we can do that. So in the first part of this sentence, je me suis réveillé tôt. I woke up early. That's what I actually did do. Mais je ne me suis pas levé tout de suite. So notice that ne and pas surround the reciprocal pronoun or reflexive pronoun and the form of être. So, je ne me suis pas levé tout de suite. Okay, so I've kind of stretched it out there a little bit, but if I'm pronouncing that a little more quickly in fast conversation, the je and the ne almost might fuse together and become like a contraction. So, mais je ne me suis pas levé tout de suite. Je ne me suis pas. Je ne me suis pas. Instead of je ne me suis pas. It would take a long time to say that. Okay, the same thing kind of happens in the first part of the sentence. Je me sort of becomes like a contracted form. So, je me suis réveillé tôt, mais je ne me suis pas levé tout de suite. So, I woke up early, but I did not get up right away. Okay, so let's say I want to do this in another form. Let's put it down here. So, nous sommes réveillés. And I'm going to put an S for a plural group here. Nous sommes réveillés tout de suite. So we did not, or we woke up right away. Nous sommes réveillés tout de suite. Okay, so let's say I want to make this negative. What do I need to do? I need to take ne, and I'm going to put it before the reflexive pronoun here. So let's put this in a different color. Okay, and I need to add pas after the form of être. So, nous ne sommes pas réveillés tout de suite. We did not wake up right away. And nous ne nous sommes pas réveillés tout de suite. It takes a little bit of getting used to, remembering that you need to put ne before the reflexive or reciprocal pronoun and after the form of être. I think that's probably a good way to keep it straight. Okay. Now, here comes the even more fun part. There's a couple of agreement rules and exceptions we need to look at with these verbs in the passé composé. So, as it tells us here, in the passé composé, the past participle agrees in gender and number with the reflexive pronoun and the subject when it's the direct object of the verb. So, what exactly does that mean? Let's try to break it down. So, this first sentence here, Rosalie s'est levée tôt. So, Rosalie got up early. So, I think you can think of this as reflecting back on Rosalie. Rosalie basically got herself up early. Since this verb is reflecting back on her and her action, and she's female, we agree or make the verb agree with her. We add an E to the end. So, Rosalie got herself up early, literally. In the other example sentence, André et Rosalie se sont mariés. Okay, so they are a male and a female. It's a mixed group, so we don't need a feminine agreement here with E. We just need to add S. And why are we making this one agree? Because it's basically reflecting back on them and what they're doing with each other. They married each other. And so for that reason, I think that's why we have the agreement here. It's an action that's reflecting on both of them, and they're both involved in it. Okay. But as it tells us below, we make the past participle agree, and this part is the past participle. Lever, marier. Those are the past participles of those verbs. Okay, so we make that past participle agree, except for these cases. So maybe verbs like se laver, se maquiller, se brosser, sometimes they're going to have an object that comes after them. So let's say Rose et Rosalie se sont lavées. So they washed themselves. Okay? And washing themselves refers back to Rose et Rosalie. So we're showing that they're both female by adding the E and the S because it's more than one female there. So they wash themselves. But, however, if we add an object to that verb, Rose et Rosalie se sont lavées les mains. They're not washing themselves in a way, but it's only one body part. They washed their hands. So it's kind of like we're taking that verb and reflecting it onto something else, not just to Rose and Rosalie, but to a specific part of their body. And in that case, we're not going to have any agreement on the verb. So in the first case, we have agreement because it's reflecting back on them as entire people. But in the second example, it's reflecting only on one part of their body, so we don't have any agreement. Okay, Rose s'est maquillée. So Rose put on her makeup. So she's doing this to herself. You can think of it as kind of her entire body, her entire person. So in that case, we're going to add the E to have some agreement. Rose s'est maquillée. Now, if we mention a specific body part, what we would consider a direct object here, we're not going to have any agreement. So, Rose s'est maquillée les yeux. So she made up her eyes. So the verb is now reflecting more on that individual body part than it is on Rose as a person. So hopefully that makes sense. Okay, with verbs like se parler, se téléphoner, s'écrire, okay, there is also no agreement because the reflexive pronoun is now an indirect object. So what does that mean? Okay, ils se sont parlé. Okay, so they talk to each other. That is the key word here. Let me pull this down and I can actually add this translation here. They talk to each other. Okay, and the important word here is to. When you put to before the object, it turns it into an indirect object because the object is not directly after the verb. There's a preposition in the middle there. So because it's now an indirect object, no agreement is required. Okay, nous nous sommes téléphonés. Okay, so the thing is in English, we would say we telephoned or called each other. This is actually direct in English. You telephone somebody, you call somebody. But in French, it's a little bit different. I can say, I'll put this in the present tense, je téléphone, à ma mère. So I call my mom, I call to my mom. Sometimes in English we may use a preposition where in French they don't, and vice versa. So in French this would be an indirect object. Je téléphone à quelqu'un, je téléphone à ma mère, je téléphone à ma sœur, je téléphone à mon frère. So because it happens to be indirect in French, It's not the case in English, where we're not going to have agreement. So I think the best thing to remember in this scenario is that just look out for those three verbs. Se parler, se téléphoner, and s'écrire. These are ones that don't require agreement when you use them in the passé composé. And finally, ils se sont écrits. Okay, so this sentence would be in English, they write each other. We don't usually use a preposition after write. Like, I've heard people say write to someone in English, but it's probably more common to leave that out. So in English, this would be a direct object. You write somebody. There's no to in the middle, usually. In French, okay, it would be, for example, j'écris à mon frère. I write to my brother. I wouldn't be j'écris mon frère. That sounds like I'm writing my brother, like I'm literally writing him on a piece of paper. So it's it can be a little confusing. It's trying to keep the direct, indirect object distinction straight. And I think it would be hard to figure this out for every single verb at this moment in your French studies. So I think if you just keep in mind that these verbs se parler, se téléphoner, and s'écrire don't require any agreement when you use them in passé composé with reflexive verbs in these cases. So it's a little bit of a complex topic this time, so we'll just leave it for that for this video, and then we just have 2 more topics to cover this week, and then we'll be ready for our first exam. So any questions you have, please let me know. I didn't include interactions in this video because I think the explanation is enough, and we just have 2 slides for this topic. But more interaction opportunities will come up in the next couple of videos. So I wish you all a good night, bonne nuit, et à la prochaine!